So first of all, I'm not speaking at all on behalf of EMA. I've left EMA 4 years ago, but it has created a bias, a regulatory bias into my mindset. And about the Critical Path Institute, this is actually a non-profit organization that exists in the US for more than 15 years and was originally funded by the FDA and still is mainly funded by the FDA. And the aim of the Critical Path Institute is to develop innovative drug development tools and methodology to accelerate drug development in pre-competitive setting and operating as a neutral background for industry, regulators, patients, academia and research institute to collaborate. And any tools that are being developed by the CPAS are being submitted for regulatory endorsement, so they can be then published and available freely to the scientific community for use in drug development. We have to date more than 20 consortia across disease, but we also have disease-agnostic consortia where we develop tools such as the Rare Disease Cure Accelerator, Data and Analytics Platform, which is disease-agnostic, or the Rare Disease Clinical Outcome Assessment Consortium. We have now the non-profit entity opened in Amsterdam since the beginning of this year, and the mission of the entity in Amsterdam is truly to facilitate global collaboration in high unmet need areas for the tools to be developed to be compatible with regional requirements and to strengthen our relationship with the European Medicine Agency and experts from the member states. And our focus will be around regulatory science and drug development tools, and also data, as I will explain, is a key aspect in research and development nowadays. So coming to today's topic, I will zoom on some of the points that Nicola mentions from the regulatory aspect, and I think that it's clear to everyone that now we can no longer operate in silo, and there are key players driving drug development that truly need to collaborate. The landscape is extremely challenging, moving to personalized medicines, and also with technology accelerating at a very fast pace. There really is the need to have collaboration from regulators, pharma companies, academia investors, policymakers and payers, patients, children and families, which is also the topic you had on your EMA slide, like youth investment into research and development. It's really important to engage with children and their families, healthcare professionals and ethics committees. And we also know that there are several phases to the drug development, and although this can be changing slightly with some innovative methodology, it is still there, and you have the early stages which can last between 3 to 6 years, then the clinical development phase, which is between 6 to 7 years, starting with phase 1 on safety, with healthy individuals, and where possible, thousands of patients in phase 3 for efficacy safety, but we know for rare disease that's far from reality. And we also have the approval phase from European Medicine Agency, FDA, and other agencies that can last between 1 to 2 years and the post-approval. And in the early days of research and development, patient was the end user and not involved in any of the phase, which was quite a problem. Therefore, the EMA, as mentioned by Nicola, since its inception in 1995, has really invested into developing first dialogue with patients, but over the time has really made a lot of effort. And I mean, I've seen it. It's like really questions always when you start an initiative. Have you engaged with the patient? Who is engaged, and how do you intend to reach out to the patient community and communicate on the topic? And nowadays, the patients are really involved in many of the EMA activities, and they are working towards having systematic patient input along medicine life cycle. So as a result of these initiatives, and here I speak about EMA, but also at FDA it's even stronger. I've seen meetings where companies can speak on behalf of patients, but if you do not have patient or patient representative in the meeting, the dynamic of the meeting is getting a bit difficult, I would say, to speak on behalf of patients. Therefore, as the initiative mentioned by Nicolas, the Bupati has prepared this mapping of activities, and you can see that you have patient representative in all committees at EMA that has resulted in having patient representative in the orphan designation, scientific advice protocol, pediatric investigation plan, and then during the evaluation for the marketing authorization application and the post-marketing. And in practice, however, this has resulted in the operational aspect of conducting and designing clinical trials to have patients being involved, however, that would still remain in the late stage of drug development. And also, I haven't put the frame on the post-approval, but they are involved in the post-approval. I think it's more my mistake than not including it. And now that it's becoming more good practice, not good practice, but mandatory practice to have patients involved into the research and development, they are getting a lot of push to have patients being involved earlier into the development. And we can see that, as Nicolas was mentioning, there is the need to have some regulatory endorsements on framework and tools that help to integrate patients and voice of patients into R&D. And this year, the qualification of the opinion in IMI prepare in order to offer a framework and methodologies for integration of patient preference studies is quite a precedent, I would say. And also the EMA has updated their framework for patient engagement in agency activities, and it was endorsed by the EMA board in 2022. Is something that sent quite a strong signal for the future of patients' involvement in over the coming years. And within the scientific community, there is also more and more publication coming from multi-stakeholder groups, including regulators, about the value and the impact of having patients involved or patient-reported outcome in early phase clinical trial, as well as the added value and impact of having patients part of regulatory procedures. And at CPAS level, I just wanted to highlight in practice how we involve and what, it's not involve, it's we work with patients and they are actually driving significant initiatives that we have. And Nicolas also mentioned digital tools, and in Parkinson we have this initiative about developing digital endpoints which have been actually designed starting from the voice of the patient, and where we have involved regulators, clinicians, and designed the technology based on the patient's preferences rather than the other way around, and work with engineer, data scientists, and statisticians to develop a framework that allows us to generate patient-centric outcome around improved quality of life, but also endpoints that matters to the patients and truly help to identify and characterize how the patient is feeling and functioning rather than just some blood results. And to have such approach encourage the data sharing, which is really also extremely important, not only to accelerate development, but also to remove some of the burden from patients involved in clinical trial, avoid to repeat unnecessary research questions, as we were mentioning, like do the same trials because people don't want to collaborate or don't want to share data. It's no longer acceptable, there are tools, and so we work also around data standards to increase the interoperability between the database and also global collaboration to reduce discrepancy between research utility and clinical value. Also, I would like to say, please don't ask me too technical questions because it's quite complex, but I try to answer any question on that as much as I can. And this one, I won't go into detail on this one, but it's a very fascinating topic for me because it's about quantitative system pharmacology that is linked to the patient voice. And the quantitative system pharmacology use mathematical models to characterize pathophysiology and drug pharmacology in the development of new medicines. And for Parkinson's disease, the disease is quite heterogeneous, pathophysiology is quite heterogeneous, and that can lead to unanticipated side effects, off-target effects, pharmacodynamic drug interaction, and poor patient response in general. And with data, a lot of mathematical approach models are being developed, and it's not always linked to the voice of the patient. And the problem is that it will be hard to qualify and validate such approach if you basically miss the plot or the patient do not engage on the technology to have the data being collected. And so that's a model that CPAS is currently developing and innovating in having the patient voice linked to this development of mathematical models. So with this type of innovation, we can see that patients are being involved maybe a bit earlier into drug development, but that still is not sufficient. And as we talk about 2030, I think my view is that we need to have the patients involved earlier from the beginning, even when you start to identify the mechanism of action of a compound or the drug targets, like in the drug discovery and preclinical level, particularly with artificial intelligence and drug repurposing, where actually we can detect drugs that are being used for some disease, but not necessarily licensed. However, this drug address the symptoms that matters to the patients, and they can have a say on where they would like to see some compounds being developed in their addressing their needs. And also in the post-approval, as mentioned by Nicola, the real-world evidence is really changing the way drugs are going to be developed, and it is important to have patients also involved in the post-marketing setting, because data that are going to be collected also with the aim to answer research questions that might then go back to the drug discovery phase or improve how a drug is being used or what is the real population that is really using the medicines. And as such, this will have an impact on how the patients are going to need to partner and the other stakeholders also to develop new skills on how to engage and work with patients. So I think pharmaceutical companies now, we can see, have chief patients officers, they have center of excellence working with patient groups, and they are more and more working with patients. In the early stages, it's quite often not necessarily pharmaceutical companies that are involved, and there is the need to engage with academia and investors who do not always have the regulatory background or the experience in working directly with patients, and therefore there is the need to engage with these other stakeholders as well as the payers. As we mentioned, like, it's also a big beast. It's very challenging to engage with these organizations. They are extremely busy, but it's coming there. And I agree with Nicola. Some countries can be approached more easily than others, but it's a system to be navigated on its own. And the healthcare professionals also working with the patients, and the trust is there between the patient and their doctors, and that's how also they can work together to to address the needs of the patients. So in this regard, like, to support the patients in engaging across the board, there are new tools that are available. At CPAS, we have this data collaboration center that allows to collect data from multiple sources, standardize them, curate them, and allow to have data available to the research community to answer any research questions that don't need to be repeated, or also to develop new tools to accelerate the development of medicines. And actually, in this regard, this initiative, the Duchenne Data Foundation, is extremely interesting because beyond education, training, research and development, or standard of care and quality of life, they have built the patient community their own database where the patients control their own data, and they decide if they want to have their data to be used for research purpose, or have data built to answer their own questions and better understand their disease or better manage their care. So they are in control from the beginning to the end. They have the highest standard in terms of data standards, fair, and all of these principles. So to be successful, I think if we want to have the patients involved across the board, they will need support, and it should be a joint effort. I think it should not be left to the patients to take the burden, and it should be really an effort supported by legal tools and guidelines for all the stakeholders to be educated on how to work and engage with patients. We need global collaboration and alignment, funding, monitoring and reporting to better understand the impact and benefit of working with patients. And the patient will need to develop strategic partnerships to have access to infrastructure that can remove some of the burden from them, communication and engagement and training and education. So I'm glad to see that I completely agree with Nicola. No pressure. And then finally, I don't have a crystal ball, but what I can say from my experience at EMA and other experience, I think there is no way back. And I think it's up to us to make it happen even faster than it's happening. Thank you.